The United States and China together are responsible for around 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But the impacts of climate change are global, and they disproportionately affect some countries more than others. More climate emissions means more warming, which translates into increased droughts, floods, heat waves, species and biodiversity loss, and all of these impacts affect poorer nations in the global south more acutely, since they are typically located in warmer climates to begin with, compared to countries in the global north, which are more temperate, more developed, which means that they are wealthier and able to adapt better. This imbalance and inequity is why the latest COP27 climate negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, focus so heavily on this concept of loss and damage, a financial mechanism that would require global north or industrialized countries responsible for the historic brunt of climate emissions to compensate global south countries for the impacts that they've caused. U.S. China collaboration on climate change and environmental issues has traditionally been viewed as a bright spot in the relationship. The two countries have had a long history of working together as the G2 in the global fight against climate, since they are the two largest present-day contributors to the problem. In fact, the G2 was credited with helping to pave the way for the 2015 Paris Agreement, the only globally inclusive climate change agreement that requires all countries, no matter if you're big, small, developed, developing, to take action on climate change. It was really a watershed agreement and incredibly momentous. And the US and China helped other nations to build confidence to get there. But tensions in other domains of the US-China relationship on trade, geopolitics, Taiwan, etc., have made the G2 relationship on climate and environmental issues rocky. So the world has realized that it can't necessarily rely on the two countries to always be perennial leaders on climate change issues. And this is really unfortunate because the two working together have much more to offer than the two working separately. But frankly, as we look towards the climate change science and the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, the 6th assessment report, we know that time is running out to turn global emissions around, to get them halved by 2030 and get to net zero by 2050. And the climate cannot wait for the US and China to agree on everything. Despite the momentous progress China has made to reduce air pollution in major cities and to increase forest cover, amongst other successes, it still faces a number of environmental challenges. For one, if you read the headlines from last summer, China experienced a historic heat wave. It was the worst heat wave that China had ever experienced. I think in the world, it was the worst heat wave that any country had ever experienced. And this heat wave emphasized the need for China to work even faster to reduce its emissions and bolster alternative sources of clean energy. During that heat wave, remember, temperatures were over 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and they went on for more than 70 days straight. And it affected a region as wide as 17 provinces and more than 900 million people. These heat waves not only led to high temperatures, but it also caused drought conditions and crippled China's hydroelectricity production. And remember, hydroelectricity supplies 16% of China's overall power output. Well, related to heat and water crises, coal still remains a persistent challenge for China, since it still comprises around 55% of the country's overall energy mix and generates more than 60% of its electricity. Of course, coal is the most carbon-intensive form of energy and leads to huge amounts of air pollution, and that causes 1 million premature deaths in China every year. Even though China has set a target for it to become carbon neutral by 2060, it has to eliminate coal and other fossil fuels from its electricity sector by 2050. And despite this target and the road ahead of them, they're still building more coal-fired power plants every day, and coal consumption has not seen meaningful declines since it is a cheap and readily available source of fuel. But the good news is that we have all the technologies available today in the form of renewable energy, solar and wind, and China continues to just completely crush benchmarks that it set for itself to continue to install these sources of renewable electricity. And of course, we know that China has been instrumental in making these technologies more affordable and cheaper than conventional fuels for countries across the world.